Friday, 27th of June 2025, and surprisingly, we're all still here. Yes, despite his best efforts, Benjamin Netanyahu did not manage to create a large war in the Middle East. However, as predicted here, the United States ended up bombing Iran on the orders of its proxy leadership in Israel. The Iranians, showing remarkable restraint, it must be said, have avoided creating an all-out war, however tensions remain high. I'm showing you a picture of a secret nuclear facility. This facility is known to produce weapons-grade plutonium, which is used in the production of nuclear weapons. However, it's not in Iran. It is the Negev nuclear facility located in Israel. I'm Bintang Bernie, and this is Friday News Review. So, Israel and America have set back Iran's nuclear facilities, and the nuclear weapons that they're on the verge of producing since 1993 are no longer a threat. We know that Iran doesn't have, or did not have, a nuclear weapons program. How do we know that? The head of the IAEA, it's a bit of a mouthful, it's the director, a guy called, his name is Rafael Mariano Grossi. He came out last week and he said that there was no evidence that Iran was pursuing a nuclear weapons program because Iran allowed inspectors into its nuclear facilities. It complied with its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. One country that we know does have nuclear weapons, which doesn't allow inspectors anywhere near any of its nuclear facilities and has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is of course Israel. How do we know Israel has nuclear weapons? Well, it's been an open secret for a long time. In 2006, Thomas Gates testified to the US Senate that Israel possessed nuclear weapons. And then in 2008, former President Jimmy Carter came out and said he was well aware that Israel possessed over 150 nuclear weapons. Just think of that, 150 nuclear weapons. That's quite frightening. How did Israel get to this point, though? How did Israel become a nuclear, if you like, superpower? In the 1950s, the French, yes, our little froggy friends, they were up to no good. In the late 50s, they started a secret program with Israel in the Negev desert near a city called Dimona. And they secretly started building a nuclear reactor with the Israelis on the proviso that France would provide the raw materials, such as uranium, and the Israelis would process it into plutonium for weapons and provide a share of that material back to the French. So the French were getting cheap plutonium for their nuclear program, and they were assisting Israel build its own nuclear program. This started in the late 50s, and it wasn't until June of 1960 that the Eisenhower presidency, the Americans found out about it. And I often wonder what would have happened had Eisenhower found out about this before, whether he would have stopped it or not. And if he had, what would have happened? I'm going to make a big assertion about that later at the end of this broadcast. But in 1960, in June 1960, what happened? There was a slip-up, if you like, by an Israeli oil magnate, a guy called Daniel Kimhi. And he blurted out to American diplomats at the US Embassy in Tel Aviv that the Israelis were building what he called a large power reactor in the Negev desert. And that they'd been building it for 2 years and it would be ready. It would be completed in about another 2 years. So it would take us to about 1962. Now, surprisingly, this caught the Americans completely out of left field. And it was a major failing of US intelligence that they had no idea that this was going on. And the Americans then started to make investigation to find out what's happening. And they put pressure on the French. And in December 1960 of that year, The French foreign minister, a guy whose name, I'm just going to read his name so I get it right, and pardon the pronunciation, Maurice Couve de Murville, I would imagine it's pronounced. He admitted to the US Secretary of State, a guy called Christian Herter, that France had in fact helped Israel establish this reactor and was providing the raw materials and would get a share of any of the plutonium that the reactor, the Dimona reactor as it was then known, would produce. And this, of course, came as a shock to the Eisenhower government. They had no idea. But the French and the Israelis assured the Americans that this was completely for peaceful purposes. They piled out a series of cover stories saying that this place was anything from a weather station to a textile plant, basically anything but a nuclear reactor. But in 1960, also in December 1960, a British nuclear scientist who was involved in the program, he became concerned, and he tipped off a journalist, a guy called Chapman Pincher, who wrote for London's Daily Express, that what the Israelis were up to. And so in 1960, Pincher came out in his article and he said that Israel is actually building an atomic weapon, which caused quite a stir. Remember, this is the 60s, the height of the Cold War. People are extremely alarmed about nuclear weapons. The Israeli officials then, of course, came out and they made a statement, which once again I'll quote directly, and it said, "Israel is not building an atom bomb and has no intention of doing so." Well, we know that Israel's track record on lying, and it goes back a long way, and there you have it again. That clearly was a lie. We now know that that was a blatant lie, that Israel was building a weapon, and they had every intention of building as many as they could. This started obviously to worry the Arab countries, because they were becoming increasingly concerned that in their midst, this rogue colonial state, which Israel is, was now on its way to possessing nuclear weapons, weapons, what we now call weapons of mass destruction. Very concerning. Ben-Gurion, who was the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, David Ben-Gurion, he went out of his way to play down any assertion that Israel was building these weapons, and even made a speech in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And he said, and once again I'll quote, so I'll get this right, "The reports in the media are false. The research reactor," research. "The research reactor we are now building in the Negev is being constructed under the direction of Israeli experts and is designed for peaceful purposes." Yes, like wiping out Arab states. "When it's complete, it will be open to scientists from other countries." Lie upon lie upon lie. The so-called research reactor was anything but a research reactor. It was building nuclear weapons. That's what its purpose was. And it has never been open to anyone from other countries. The Israelis do not allow inspection of their nuclear facilities. In fact, they even deny that their nuclear facilities exist. Now, this is interesting, and this comes towards what I'm going to assert, okay? All this stuff I'm telling you now is factual. I'll clarify when I'm making an assertion. In May of '61, Kennedy had come into the White House, and he was extremely concerned. Kennedy, probably more so than any US president before or since, understood the risks and the dangers of nuclear weapons and the danger of proliferation of nuclear weapons. I mean, for Christ's sakes, the superpowers nearly went to war under his presidency over nuclear weapons. So he dispatched two scientists from the Atomic Energy Commission to go and inspect the Dimona site. And the Israelis were forced to allow them in. Now, the CIA issued a report on this. It's now declassified in the National Archives in America. And the Americans, the Israelis were saying that this is a peaceful reactor. But at the time, when Kennedy dispatched these scientists, they came back and they said, and once again I'll quote from the released report, "Israel may have decided to undertake a nuclear weapons program. At a minimum, we believe it has decided to develop nuclear facilities in such a way as to put it into a position to develop nuclear weapons promptly should it decide to do so." Now, isn't that interesting? There's a couple of interesting points here. Essentially, that's what Israel has criticized Iran of doing, or being in a position since 1993. Well, we know from 1961 they were in that position, so they had a bit of a head start. And it is interesting that Kennedy was dead against the nuclear program. His people came back and said Israel is in a position to build nuclear weapons. Kennedy immediately put pressure on Israel not to do so. It's interesting, and this is speculation on my part, but it's something I actually believe will come to light in the future. It is interesting that the one US president who stood up to Israel and said, no, you can't have a nuclear weapons program, is also the one that got assassinated, got his head blown off. Now, we all know that Lee Harvey Oswald, as a self-confessed patsy, he said, I'm a fall guy, I didn't do this. We know that it's ridiculous that Lee Harvey Oswald alone shot Kennedy. And I'm going to assert to you that it may be 5, 10, 100 years from now, but one day it will come out the Israelis killed Kennedy because Kennedy stood in the way of their nuclear weapons program. And as we know, Israel does not allow anyone to stand in its way. It treats the US as a vassal state. I believe the Israelis would have had no qualms about knocking off a US president to ensure that they kept their own weapons program going. Because Israel looks after only one nation, it's Israel. Israel cares about Israel and Israel only. It doesn't give a damn about anyone else. And it will walk over, destroy, kill, bomb, assassinate anyone or anything that gets in its way. So I'd be interested to be around in 100 years to see when files are released, but I guarantee you the Israelis had a large hand in what happened to Kennedy. And it would shock America to the core if the American people actually realized that their so-called greatest ally is the one that killed their so-called greatest president. But that's an assertion. However, we'll see what happens. Now, moving on, just going through my notes here. The Americans released a report in 2013 citing, this is a report based on what had happened back in the 60s, that Israel possessed a minimum of 80 atomic weapons. Okay, so we have history, as I'm saying, there's a history. Israel clearly is a nuclear armed state, and it's a dangerous one. To this day, they've never admitted anyone to what's now known as the Negev nuclear facility. It's a secretive site. It's kept away from the world. It's in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it's dangerous. It's funny, I was having a chat with my brother the other day, and he's a pretty switched on guy, and we've often been at pains to understand why the world seems to be held to ransom by Israel and why the major Western nations seem so afraid of Israel not being defended or being strong. And he made an assertion that, well, with Israel being nuclear armed, maybe they're worried that those fuckers are crazy enough to start letting off nuclear bombs if they feel threatened. And of course, what he was alluding to is something known as the Samson doctrine. Now, this is an official Israeli doctrine. Under the Samson doctrine, Israel has an official policy where if it feels it's being overrun or defeated, it will resort to nuclear weapons. So the question begs, recently we saw with the attacks by Iran how vulnerable Israel is. For the first time, they got a taste of their own medicine. And their so-called, Iron Dome system turned out to be more of a tin dome, not at all impervious to Iranian ballistic missiles. And the question begs, had that war escalated or those exchanges escalated, and had Iran started to cause massive damage to Israel, they'll cause serious damage already, but had it got much worse, would Israel have used nuclear weapons against Iran? And given the Samson doctrine, I'm inclined to say yes. Remember in 73 in Yom Kippur, when the Israelis were getting battered, the so-called invincible IDF, this myth they possess that the IDF is so wonderful. Well, in 73, they were getting the shit kicked out of them. Golda Meir, who was the Israeli Prime Minister, she ordered the preparation of 13 nuclear weapons to be prepared and ready to be used, loaded, ready to go. And she then threatened Nixon, who was the American president at the time, and said, if you guys don't come in and help us out of this mess, we're going to start dropping these things. So the Americans, once again, and double-sided, out of their subservience to Israel, but also in sheer panic as to a major nuclear conflagration breaking out in the Middle East, they went in and they shipped massive amounts of aid and equipment and assisted Israel to conventionally overcome its attackers. Any country which has that ability is dangerous, and Israel even more so. Before Yom Kippur, the Israelis actually had a plan to set off a nuclear weapon in the Sinai as an example, as a warning to the Arab states. Basically, don't fuck with us. Now, what sort of country just drops nuclear bombs just as a statement, let you know we're here? Israel is a dangerous nuclear-armed rogue state. So, where do we go from here? Well, as long as Netanyahu is the Prime Minister of Israel, he is a dangerous, dangerous human being. And he is at the root of all of these problems. He's the thorn in the elephant's foot. He will continue his fanatical, almost pathological hatred of Iran and his determination to destroy it. Iran is a large continental power. It's the size of Western Europe. It's a very big place. Very difficult for Israel to actually defeat Iran. That's why his actual real objective is regime change, to get a puppet government in place, like they've done basically in Iraq, in Syria. They toppled Libya. Gaddafi, by the way, warned the Arabs. I saw Gaddafi give a speech to the Arab League saying basically, they're coming after us. They're going to knock us off one at a time, guys. We need to unite. Of course, unity has never been the Arab world's strong point. But moving forward, what do we have? Clearly, there is incentive now for Iran to develop nuclear weapons and have a nuclear deterrent because they are under threat from Israel, as long as Netanyahu remains. So looking at the way forward, the stability of the place is unbelievable. I mean, you've got Erdogan and the Turks to the north. That guy you can't trust as far as you could throw. 1 minute he's talking about fighting Israel, the next he's helping them carve up Syria and working in coordination with them. My only hope for the future is that Netanyahu leaves office. As long as he is there, not just the region, not just Israel, not just Iran, but the world is at threat. If Netanyahu's government and his Likud party are replaced by a more stable, less fanatical, less religiously fundamental party, there's a hope for a more stable future. And I can't believe I'd ever say this, but it's actually in all of our interests that the stability, that there remains a strong and stable Israel. That's actually in the world's interests, given that they have nuclear weapons, they're inclined to use them. It might be a stretch, but they are in a situation where they have a policy and a doctrine of using them as required, as they see fit. So we need to contain that threat. And the best way forward would be to have a more stable, centrist government in Israel, which would help the Israelis, because Israel is a highly fractured society. It's not the unified society. It's full of division. And there's a big movement. There's a lot of Israelis, a lot of Zionists that I talk to that can't stand Netanyahu. So if we had a more stable government and a more stable future, we might have a chance of implementing a two-state solution, which would be workable to both the Arab nations and the Israelis themselves. And we could give the Palestinians assistance to rebuild a fraction of their stolen homeland and hope that they accept what basically is theft in the hope that we have a more stable future. Personally, I would just put a line through Israel, straight through Jerusalem, and have the top half as Palestine and the bottom half as Israel, and Jerusalem as a joint open capital for both states. Too easy a solution, I guess, but unfortunately we're not going to get anywhere unless we have a two-state solution with stability, which would require pressure from countries like the United Kingdom and America, because they're the stumbling blocks. You know, America is the only country that vetoed the ceasefire in Gaza. So these are the stumbling blocks. Countries like China and Russia are actually actively looking to implement a two-state solution that would work. And we need to do it, and we need to do it soon, because you keep getting told in your media that countries like North Korea and China are your threats. No. If a large, dangerous world nuclear war is to break out, it's going to have its origins in the Middle East, and it's going to have its origins with Israel. And the Israelis need to be contained in a way that they feel safe and they feel secure, so that we are all safe and we are all secure. Anyway, just as an aside, in closing, interesting week. We had Annette Latouf she won her court case for unfair dismissal from the ABC, proving that Zionism isn't all conquering. It always amazes me that non-Zionists make so much effort to persecute anyone that they believe might be talking in a way that Zionists don't like. And it's not anti-Semitic to criticize genocide. It's pretty basic human moralistic speech. So well done, and a big raspberry to the ABC. And how embarrassing that our actual state government-sponsored broadcaster can be found to be so much under the clutches of the Zionist influence. Yet that is the way that the Zionists work in this country and other countries. The other thing, in closing, I'd just like to mention, 3 weeks ago we did a program and I talked about David McBride, and one of the issues I brought up was a thing known as the Nuremberg defense, where I spoke how at the Nuremberg trials it was accepted into law that you cannot just say as a soldier or an officer, I was following orders. I shot a 14-year-old girl in the head because my officer told me to do it. At some point, you have to make a moral judgment, and if an order is not legal and it's immoral, you are obliged not to follow it. You have the right. The Nuremberg defense has enshrined that in law. And I spoke about that in terms of David McBride and how he broke rank with the military. However, in light of the Nuremberg defense, there was reasons for him and justification for him to do so. The good news is, yesterday, Michael West, who is a great news source, if you want to learn things, look up Michael West. He did a story where David McBride's lawyers are now going through an appeal to the High Court, which is his last chance to get out of jail, where he shouldn't be in the first place. Yet, what his lawyers are invoking, they're going to take the Nuremberg defense to the High Court and argue that in light of the Nuremberg defense, David McBride had every right to break army regulations and to go against what were, in effect, orders. So we'll see how that progresses, and hopefully it works for David and he gets out of jail where he should never be in the first place. Anyway, this is Bintang Bernie signing off for the week and saying, as always, remember, there are two types of people in the world. Make sure you avoid them both.